Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Darcy Delgado. I, along with Ashley Breath, make up a portion of the DSH Diversion team, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. As I mentioned earlier, please ensure that you are muted on the WebEx in the upper right-hand corner next to your name. There's a little button that you can click. When you're muted, you will see a red iconed microphone with a line through it, which indicates that you are muted. I might go through and mute people if we end up having some feedback on the line. We are super excited to have this peer learning opportunity and webinar today entitled Emerging Practices for Community Outreach and Communications to Gain Community Buy-in for Affordable Housing for Mental Health Diversion. Maybe the longest title of any of the webinars that we've had so far. And much appreciation to CSG and the Council of State Government and their Justice Center, as well as CCJBH, who are partnering with Department of State Hospitals and the Council of State Government on webinars and technical assistance issues related to mental health diversion. I'd like to, again, in addition to encouraging everyone to keep themselves on mute, would like to point out that in the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx, you have the opportunity to introduce yourself to the group. If you could just put in a chat message. If you indicate that you want to send it to everyone, we can just get an idea of who is here, and we'd be really appreciative of that. In addition, if you have any questions that come up during the webinar or issues that you'd like to talk about that are specific to your county, you have two options. One is to enter them into a chat message within the feature that I just described. Another option you have is to, at some point in time, we may ask for questions, in which case you can unmute yourself. I would just ask that if you are going to be participating and interacting with our presenters, if you could make sure that you're calling in. Oftentimes the microphones on the computers are quite difficult and cause that kind of feedback reverberation that we heard earlier. So if you could call in and use your telephone to do that, that would be great. I think that's all the housekeeping. If you do have any weird technical things that come up, you can also chat message me, Darcy, during today's webinar. So all that aside, again, we just want to say thank you to CSG, and I will introduce the people who will be speaking with you today. So leading from the Council of State Governments is Thomas Coyne. Thomas is a senior policy analyst with the CSG Justice Center and works on the intersection of health, housing, and behavioral health, including providing technical assistance to county and state agencies. In addition to Thomas presenting, our next panelist name is Susan Holt. Susan is the Deputy Director of Clinical Operations for the Department of Behavioral Health in the County of Fresno. Susan is the program lead for Fresno County's Mental Health Diversion Program and has had some good success with navigating different housing issues within Fresno County. And we'll be talking about some of the creative approaches to obtaining housing that her county has taken. After Susan speaks, we will hear from some colleagues out of Oregon. The first is Jacob Fox. Jacob is the Executive Director of Homes for Good, a public housing authority, and he strongly believes that housing is a basic human right and believes in our ability to create stronger communities by linking affordable housing residents with healthcare, education, employment, and other supportive services. Paul Solomon is the Executive Director at Sponsors, Inc., which is a cutting-edge prisoner reentry program that has been providing services to people with criminal justice histories since 1973. So we're so lucky to have these great panelists here who have experience in really trying to obtain housing for a population that has a lot of confounding factors, including criminal justice and mental health issues. So I am now going to mute myself and hand the presentation over to Thomas, who will be walking us through the next hour.
Great. Thank you so much, Darcy. I greatly appreciate the opportunity for myself and really for everyone to hear from Susan, Paul, and Jacob today. Yes, thank you. So about the Council of State Governments Justice Center, we are a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that combines the power of a membership organization representing state officials in all three branches of government with policy and research expertise to develop strategies that increase public safety and strengthen communities. And how we do our work, we work by bringing folks together, such as today, through original research, through coalition building, and in providing technical and expert assistance. As you heard from Darcy, join us today are Jacob Fox, Susan Holt, and Paul Solomon, who have all engaged in this work. And I'll be setting the field a little bit with some statistics specifically for California, as well as provide an overview of community buy-in strategies. And you'll hear from Susan and her experiences in Fresno, as well as from Paul and Jacob in their work in Lane County, Oregon. And following that, we'll conclude with discussion where people have the chance to really discuss and share any challenges or any further questions they might have, and really problem solve with the experts that we have here today. All right. So the importance of community buy-in. So first, I think as sadly all of us are aware, there's a lack of affordable housing both nationally and in California. Not very surprising, but the numbers certainly can feel staggering at times. And additional obstacles that face both in California and really in every community at the local level. There are challenges around zoning and neighborhood opposition, our primary focus today. But none of us, I think anyone on the line here, would stop just at the challenges, which is really what brings us to gaining that buy-in from the community. So really, why does community buy-in matter? Change in general can bring opposition, and changes to neighborhoods can really result in particularly fierce opposition. Just like leveraging funding requires drawing from multiple funding streams for housing or many other projects, gaining community buy-in really requires drawing support from so many different sectors, as Susan, Paul, and Jacob will all speak to. And gaining community buy-in. So there's a number of strategies to gain community buy-in, and you'll hear from concrete examples from both gone on in Fresno as well as Lane County. And overall, it requires planning, education of the public and elected officials, where that story is pretty familiar about why that's important. But equipping both public and elected officials with the facts beforehand, really that means that you won't be starting from square one or trying to win over people who otherwise would have supported you had they not been primed against you by vocal opposition in the community. In addition, building support and bringing together existing coalitions or partnerships to help develop affordable housing. And a large part of this is presenting the evidence, and really this gets down to telling the local story using local data and local examples, and sharing the successes that you've had getting people housed, getting people to places where they're stable in their life, really sharing that local story. And using local evidence is a big part of that. So, for example, it includes how this can affect all of us, such as, and especially things that are particularly important to homeowners, such as showing that there's not an effect on housing values of new affordable housing, which is a common concern for homeowners, if also a common misconception, thankfully. This data is pulled from Trulia and actually is specific to a couple counties in California where they had looked at both before and after data from the time that affordable housing projects had been built. And as you can see, the numbers move pretty much in line with each other, which is both heartening to see and also challenging since the numbers increase so greatly. And brought in this story to illustrate how we're all affected, not just housing values, but other examples include how when your rent is going up, now my rent is going up, and becomes a burden, it's going up for everyone. And this can particularly result in episodes of homelessness for people who are at the lower income tiers. And this specifically, Zillow Research has done some great work in bringing in, like, what point is that? And it's a point at which, as Zillow points out in their study, many communities in California are above currently. And in addition to really level setting and showing what the story is, there is an opportunity to address realistic opposition, such as fitting a building type into a neighborhood otherwise that might increase buy-in, or at the very least, not create new opposition to what's going on. And a large part of this, and a large part of interacting with the community, are communication strategies. And building a message in the planning process, a large part of this. In messaging overall, what experts and what we've seen across the country is important is overall it's important to try to not to draw lines in the sand, really. So you might have noticed that I've gotten this far without actually ever saying NIMBY yet, which was intentional on my part. The focus isn't on opposing opposition, as that might be, but really it's about getting people to buy in or to have realistic concerns be addressed. And I'll emphasize realistic concerns. And that includes how we frame what we're doing, which is not, to be clear, not about not being assertive. And I think Jacob and Paul can really speak to being assertive in community meetings. But there's enough opposition already, really. And it's really about trying to broaden the idea of the problem to get people and elected officials and everyone else together and working to gain support. And a great resource in this space comes from Enterprise Community Partners and the Framework Institute, who together they've compiled a list of common messaging mistakes. So really the frequent messages we might try but ultimately fail to land with the public and with public audiences, and how instead to refocus your message instead. And these are some of the concepts that they suggest. And this is also among the resources that we and Darcy will leave with you today and following the webinar. And of course, there are opportunities, thankfully. As you'll hear, the challenge presents opportunities to strengthen partnerships and really build strong coalitions. The partnerships are key to bringing unique, powerful voices to the community that can properly set expectations. And really this work is really undertaking the hard work of government and democracy, which is engaging the public, which especially in the face of particularly fierce opposition can sometimes be really challenging, but it's work that others have done and have been successful at and have gotten great work done. And here are some of the resources that help illustrate these strategies and that will be available for you following the webinar. And Susan, now I'll turn it on over to you.
Thank you so much. I think your presentation is a nice transition to the remarks that I'll make today. And for those participating, I want to first apologize that I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you. My sincere apologies on that, but I have asked Darcy to make sure, Darcy Delgado from Department of State Hospitals, I've asked her to make sure that anyone who wants to learn more about what we're doing in Fresno certainly can have my full contact information, and I'm more than happy to answer questions and communicate with folks offline. So quickly, I want to describe that we're in our early stages of our diversion efforts here in Fresno County, but I think the work that I'll be describing with our community partnerships and engagement, as well as our housing efforts, actually have great promise for applicability to services and supports and housing for those involved in the justice system. For us here in Fresno County, the key to our success really has been that cross-sector collaborative relationship focus. I'll first start talking a little bit about our partnership with the Fresno Housing Authority. We've had a great relationship with them for over a decade. We have a formal memorandum of understanding for a variety of housing supports. We have 3 permanent supportive housing properties that we co-manage together. They are the property manager, and we provide the supportive services. And that was funded on our side through the Mental Health Services Act quite a number of years ago. In addition to that, they provide us vouchers for housing for the persons that we serve. We call this the Shelter Plus Care voucher program. So that allows us to do scattered site housing, where we provide the treatment and supportive services to individuals, and the Housing Authority provides the voucher. I'm excited to share also that through California's No Place Like Home, our department and the Housing Authority was awarded 3 projects for funding to develop new permanent supportive housing projects in our community. And building on what the previous presenter was describing, some of our community outreach that we've done with the Housing Authority has really been following the culture they've set for all affordable housing and housing-related projects is the good neighbor policy. We have meetings in neighborhoods anywhere that we're going to be developing a program with the Housing Authority. We jointly present, the Department of Behavioral Health and the Housing Authority leadership jointly present on the project. We showcase successes in prior projects. For example, at a most recent neighborhood meeting, we had a resident who had expressed many concerns years ago when we came into the neighborhood with a new project, and was actually one of those who had fierce opposition. And she told her story of how she was actually delighted to have been proven wrong, and how we were actually one of the best neighbors they could have asked for, and actually improved the community in which that project was placed. So that is a way of engaging the community to showcase successes while also genuinely addressing the concerns that folks may have. One of the things that's made our partnership with the Housing Authority so valuable is the executive level support and buy-in from their senior leadership. So Preston Prince is the gentleman who is in charge over there, and he is a great ally of our department. In fact, he traveled with our director and myself to another state in Colorado to see housing programs to help us understand trauma-informed design for housing programs and look at some of their justice-related services as well. I want to talk a little bit about other cross-sector collaborations and partnerships, which I think will help folks understand the value in cross-sector engagement when working through community development. In our community, it's not perfect, but we've come a long way. We have some long-standing collaborations which have brought together behavioral health, hospitals, law enforcement, the courts, the schools, and the public. One of those is called Community Conversations Around Mental Health, and this was really born out of crisis. A decade ago, following the downturn in the economy, we actually closed our crisis unit. It was devastating in our community for those who needed crisis services, and it also had tremendous impacts for other sectors, as you can imagine. And through that crisis was born this commitment from leaders across our community to work together to solve issues. There's a quote that we often say, credited to a woman named Lynn Ashbeck in our community. And what she said is that if any one sector could solve the problems related to mental health, surely they would have. And what that tells us is that we must work together. And so building from the work of that community conversations group, we've launched a suicide prevention collaborative, which includes all of those cross-sector participants that I mentioned, as well as members of the public. And in the justice space, we have a local coordinating justice council and numerous other forums where we come together across sectors to strategize on how to work with our communities to not only provide services, but also make sure that they have a voice in what we're doing. I want to transition to stakeholder engagement as a mandate in the behavioral health system. So for those of you who are familiar with the Mental Health Services Act in California, also known as Proposition 63, we're required to engage in a community planning process to develop a plan for the use of funds. And how this connects to housing is that in Fresno County, our stakeholders have really pushed us hard to address housing for the people we serve. In fact, there was a period in time when our Behavioral Health Board was not only holding us accountable to do that, but insisting that we work harder and faster to create more housing opportunities for those we serve. So from that, we created a cross-sector housing task force. We brought in an outside consultant, Harder & Company, and they worked with us to do a housing inventory and needs assessment for our community, specifically for those individuals experiencing a serious mental illness. And we provide quarterly updates on housing to our Behavioral Health Board. And the reason this is important from a community engagement and outreach perspective is that housing needs, I'm confident, are not unique to Fresno. As our previous presenter was describing, this is an issue in many areas. But it's not just about affordable housing, it's also about appropriate housing. And I think sometimes persons who are experiencing a serious mental illness, as well as persons who are in the justice system, and most certainly those who fit both of those descriptions, have experienced being a disenfranchised group and experience discrimination on so many levels that we really need to address the appropriateness of housing. Another thing that's important for you all to be aware of in Fresno County, the relationships have to include the executive level leadership, and as our prior presenter mentioned, the elected officials. And we've been very fortunate here in Fresno County to have that level of buy-in. For example, recently, a couple of months ago, at our board's with our board's support, our county administrative office hosted a public community forum on homelessness. And in that panel, we had county and city leadership, a representative from the Housing Authority, Continuum of Care leadership, the Department of Social Services, Public Health, and Behavioral Health, all speaking openly, transparently, and publicly about what we're trying to do to increase affordable housing for all populations while also increasing access to services for those who are experiencing homelessness. Certainly that includes our individuals involved in justice services as well. Along the same lines of that, with the executive level commitment, our department's director and the county administrative office went to 14 of our rural cities in our large county to have conversations related to their needs that might be unique compared to the city of Fresno, which is our largest city. And from those conversations over the period of about a year, we were able to inform and agree as a county on 14 priorities for how we will allocate our resources. I'll pivot just a little bit in my remarks here to describe some of the housing efforts that the Department of Behavioral Health in Fresno County has done in recent years. Our efforts have been focused on our general population of adults with serious mental illness and a little bit for youth and their families. But I want to again emphasize that much of what we've done here has applicability for the diversion population as well. So I mentioned previously about our permanent supportive housing projects that we've been operating for a number of years and our new projects on the horizon. But I want to talk a little bit about inclusion. Sometimes from a program perspective, individuals may be placed in housing that congregates them by their defined history or defined attributes. So for example, in some of our housing, we may have individuals who have justice involvement who are all placed in a small apartment complex because it is the value of shared experience and the economies of scale from a financial perspective. But we recognize that we need to balance that value with the rights of individuals to have housing and supportive services and options across the community, and that their housing choices and services shouldn't be limited by their history. That's certainly challenging, and we haven't mastered this quite yet, but we are working on it, and it aligns with our guiding principles of care delivery, that the person we're serving should have the freedom of choice. We continue to build our inventory of permanent supportive housing through our partnerships. We recognize that we couldn't have, even though we have a great relationship with the Housing Authority, we couldn't have all of our eggs in their basket. So we went through a competitive procurement process to identify additional development sponsors so that our department could continue to apply for funding for permanent supportive housing with other partners. And so we were successful in that effort to add 2 additional developers into our agreements that are board-approved contracts that allow us to pursue funding for housing with those partners. The other exciting thing that we're doing, and I would encourage counties to look into, is what's called a Housing Institute. We developed a contract with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. Of course, they operate nationally. They've done a Housing Institute in many other states, as well as Los Angeles here in California. A Housing Institute is a project whereby we bring together prospective developers and supportive service providers for shared learning across multiple months in order to have project-ready applications to pursue funding. The goal for us here in Fresno County is to expand our inventory of developers who are ready, willing, and able to develop more permanent supportive housing for the populations that we're serving. In addition to that, our contract with Corporation for Supportive Housing provides technical assistance to our department. We are in no way experts on housing, and we've been very open and transparent about that. So we are utilizing CSH for our technical assistance. And then in addition to that, we have a membership with CSH to participate in online trainings. It's been very valuable for our clinical staff to participate in those trainings. We've learned a lot in the last 18 months about supportive services, how to fund housing, and again, relevant to this discussion today, community engagement and those good neighbor policies. A few other creative things that we've done related to housing is funded through our Mental Health Services Act, and our community stakeholder planning process has generated these ideas and support them. One of them is our master leasing agreement. For some of the individuals that we serve, they may have the ability to pay rent, but they may have barriers to securing a lease. For example, they may have had evictions in their history, and it is difficult for them to get a lease in their own name. So we've partnered with a community-based organization, and this particular partner happens to also be a mental health provider of ours, and they secure master lease with developers and property owners, and then they sublease those units to individuals that we connect to the master leasing program. And there's supportive services that go along with this. The idea here is that we help the individual build a rental history while also providing them the skills necessary for tenancy, and then folks can build on that learning to have independent living in the future. Another creative strategy we've borrowed from some of our colleagues in the Department of Social Services is we have a hotel-motel voucher program. Some of the individuals have a plan for housing, but there's a gap for when their unit might be available or when their plan can be executed. So individuals who would otherwise be living on the streets for 3 to 6 weeks or possibly lose that secured unit because of that homelessness, we have the ability to place them in a hotel or a motel so that they have the stability and the dignity to maintain course while they're waiting for their unit to be available. We also utilize our Mental Health Services Act funding flexibly to reduce barriers to housing, such as helping with financial assistance to pay energy bills that might have stacked up on a person, or to pay for an animal to be spayed or neutered so that they can secure housing, and other creative uses of funding. And of course, in California, Mental Health Services Act has allowed our full service partnerships to have flexible funding to provide housing. And then we have a new Mental Health Services Act program on deck, soon to be launched, hopefully this year, called our Intensive Transition Team. And this is a team to welcome our individuals back into our community who've been staying in our local Fresno County jail. And this would be a team that's intentionally designed to do whatever it takes on a short-term basis to connect individuals with a serious mental illness to downstream resources, and this would include providing any necessary housing until they can get connected to a longer-term plan. We recognize that transitions in housing and transitions in care are a really vulnerable time for individuals, and so we're excited to launch this new program coming soon. So this has been a very fast summary of some of our exciting partnerships and community engagement and housing efforts here in Fresno County. And if anyone is interested in learning more, we will be happy to provide our contact information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And now we'll hand it on over to Jacob and Paul.
Super. Thanks for having us. We're excited to continue this conversation about how we've been able to foster community buy-in with a number of projects that we've done together. But first, next slide, please. A little bit about our respective organizations. Sponsors is a private nonprofit that's been providing reentry services to people with conviction history since 1973. Our philosophy is based on the belief that people can and do change, and that a strategic intervention at the right time can serve as a catalyst in that change process. And our experience has taught us that the day people are released from custody when they're homeless, providing them with a housing intervention has been critical to their long-term success. We currently operate 20 buildings on 6 sites with over 220 units of transitional and permanent housing. We provide intensive case management. We have a robust volunteer and peer mentoring programs. We provide employment services, cognitive behavioral therapy, drug and alcohol treatment, and mental health services. We operate a VA grant and per diem program for veterans with conviction histories, legal clinics, and a range of supports that are really designed to address the wide range of needs that people have releasing from custody. So with that, I'll kick it over to Jacob to talk a little bit about Homes for Good.
Great. Hello, everybody. So just a quick thumbnail about my background. So I've worked, this is my 3rd housing authority that I've worked for, and then I work for the City of Portland's Housing Bureau as well. So I've been kind of in a role of real estate developer, implementer, housing authority, but also kind of have a handful of years experience being a funder of affordable housing and overseeing 10-year plan to end homelessness. So I would agree with Susan. The Fresno Housing Authority has just an exceptional national reputation, but I would say that in general, a lot of housing authorities struggle to really push on best practices, especially as it relates to PSH and serving people returning to our communities after completing their prison sentence, in part because, you know, we have all of our own sort of regulations that we juggle, and then the HUD funding that we receive doesn't have a lot of extra administrative fee to allow us to spend time getting out of the box. I would say that housing authorities that do real estate development, like we're an active real estate developer, obviously Fresno is, you earn fees and some cash flow off your real estate, and that allows a lot of housing authorities to get more out of the box and creative in my experience. My philosophy is that housing authorities should be reducing as many barriers as possible to serve special needs populations. So that's just kind of the heart and lens that I bring to the work. We can advance to the next slide. So this is just really telling the story that sponsors and Homes for Good have been working together for many years. And I would say, and Paul can elaborate on this, sponsors has more and more housing experience, both as an operator and developer. But historically, they have kind of leaned on us as their real estate development arm. So obviously, we did some work in the early 90s. I would say Roosevelt Crossing's an interesting project. We may talk a little bit more about it, but it was built during the recession. And it operates, it's a low-income housing tax credit project, but it operates kind of like transitional housing. And that has brought some kind of regulatory, not really compliance challenges, but it just requires us to be super mindful of tax credit compliance. So I would say that it would be a stretch for me to think that our state housing finance department would approve a project that's similar to that in this day and age. Bothy Cottages project for women, where we just really were more of a construction manager. And then we're going to talk more about the Oaks at 14th, which was a dynamic partnership between both organizations. So you can advance to the next slide.
So sponsors' target population are individuals with conviction histories, the vast majority of whom are releasing from state or local correctional institutions. These are individuals who've been assessed using a validated risk assessment tool as moderate to very high risk to reoffend, who are releasing homeless with no identified housing. And we've targeted a number of subpopulations that we deem as priority populations that need additional supports, including people with sex offense convictions. Currently in Oregon, 29% of the state prison population are sex offenders, and so that's reflected in the releasing population. Oregon also has the highest concentration of people over the age 55 in custody, which also creates a host of challenges around physical disabilities and as well as an increasing or burgeoning population of people with mental health issues in our criminal justice system. We also prioritize women with children and veterans. Next slide.
Great. So just to elaborate a little bit, and then I'll turn it over to Paul. So we structured the financial sort of transaction during the recession. So the tax credits were something like 60 cents on the dollar. So it was a tough project given sort of the recession that was at play. We received a national award from the Housing Authority Membership Association. And then I talked about the transitional nature of this project and how it's pretty unique for a low-income housing tax credit project. And then the only other thing I'd say, and Paul can elaborate, is that we, as part of this development, we also were able to program in a significant amount of administrative space for sponsors. So having them on site and having their administrative office has really made their management of the project just super smooth from our perspective.
Yeah. So a couple of things that I'll mention about the project. Staff 24 hours a day. We have 85 beds for men in this facility. And I'll talk about, Susan mentioned the appropriateness of housing. And one of the things that I appreciate about the projects that we've been able to develop is that they are aesthetically very attractive, they're well maintained, they're beautifully landscaped, and they're really a contradiction to what people experience in prison. our facilities are anything but institutional. And I think it's important when we're talking about developing housing for this population that we're not creating substandard housing, that we are building facilities that are trauma-informed, that are really designed with the needs of this very special population in mind. Next slide. So we'll talk a little bit about the Oaks at 14th. This is a project that we began developing in 2015. We started construction in 2016. We're going to talk quite a bit about the engagement process with the neighborhood and some of the initial pushback that we received. But the project itself is a 54-unit tax credit project, all one-bedroom, fully furnished units. It's a permanent supportive housing project. We have a range of services that we provide on site, including case management, mentoring services, mental health services. We have offices for parole and probation at this facility and at Roosevelt Crossing. And this is also a Housing First project. So let's kick it to the next slide, please.
Great, so I'll start on this, and then obviously Paul and I were engaged in every one of these meetings, so we have a lot of feelings about it. But I just kind of lead with my perspective around affordable housing development for special needs populations. For me, it's not if you should develop in a neighborhood, it's really how. And I think similar to California, Oregon citizens have, in my opinion, a lot of rights around kind of land use appeals. There really is just sort of a thinly veiled opportunity to say that they don't want certain people to live in their neighborhood. So I have strong feelings about neighbors saying that affordable housing or people with criminal histories shouldn't get to live in a neighborhood. That said, it was really important to us to engage proactively with the neighbors. This project did happen pretty quickly because another project for Homes for Good fell through. So we kind of started off with needing to play catch up with the neighborhood a little bit because we'd already purchased the land. So again, it wasn't an if, it was a how. And then I would say that the first neighborhood meeting had probably 80 people, which is really big for Lane County or where we live. And just a lot of people had high anxiety. They had discriminatory ideas about who would be in this building or served by sponsors. So it started out intense, and then as we sort of educated and engaged, that intensity level dropped significantly. So I'll just turn it over to Paul to kind of add his perspective as well.
So a couple of things that I would mention about the project. As Jacob said, we held a number of community meetings. The first couple of meetings were pretty intense. We did have a real united front in that we had strong support from all of our elected officials representing City Council, the Board of County Commissioners. We had representatives from the Lane County Sheriff's Office, Lane County Parole and Probation, and the Eugene Police Department, all there in support of the project. So that helped to mitigate some of the public safety concerns. But at the end of the day, we really had to address a lot of unfounded fears and myths that people had about this population. And one of the things that was also unique about this project is that we decided that we wanted to house people with sex offense convictions there, which really kind of ups the ante and raises neighborhood concerns. There are a lot of myths about this population. These are folks folks that are all on supervision. The reoffense rates are extremely low. So there was a lot of public education that occurred. We invited neighbors to come and look at some of our other facilities. We held meetings at a variety of different times to be able to engage neighbors on the weekend, in the evenings, really trying to accommodate their schedules. And at the end of the day, we were able to, by the final meeting that we had, I would say we had moved the majority of the people who were opposed to the project to a position of either being neutral or actually supportive. However, there were a few people that there was nothing that we could say or do to convince them that this project wasn't going to increase crime and that there wasn't going to drop their property values. Many of the myths associated with housing this type of population. And there were appeals. At one point, we had the issuance of building permits appealed, and we had to take that all the way to the state land use appeals board. We prevailed, and it's an added expense that I think with these type of projects, you just have to take into account. For us, I forget what the total dollar amount was, but it was well over $50,000 that we spent in attorney's fees and consultant fees in managing the appeal process. The other thing that I would say is that we made a number of design concessions. When we met with neighbors, there were concerns about the fact that we had third-story units looking down on R1 homes. So we actually removed a number of units. So we didn't have third-story units looking down directly on neighbors' properties. We glazed windows. We milled a bunch of oak trees that were on the property and built park benches that we donated to the neighboring homeowners association. So we did a lot of things to really try and engender goodwill with the neighbors. Anything else you want to say about the process, Jacob? No. Okay, great. Next slide. Oh, one last thing that I will say is we also created a citizens advisory committee, which I think was really helpful, where we engaged a number of neighbors, and we had elected officials sitting on the advisory committee that helped inform neighbor concerns, provided a forum for us to address issues that came up during construction, and really was I think, a great venue to engage concerned neighbors.
Great. I'm going to kind of speed up just because I think you guys get access to this slide deck. To our brothers and sisters in California, I know you can't develop as cheaply as we can. This project was $9.2 million in total, about $170,000 a unit, which is, we think, somewhat expensive, but I know for many of you that those are sort of peanuts. I would say that this was a pretty simple project to finance, and so frankly that was the easiest part of the project for us. So I can answer any questions on the sort of source stack in the Q&A, but why don't you go ahead and advance?
Yeah, and I think we'll gloss over this one as well. This is we also received a $1.3 million Pay for Success grant that allowed us to serve 125 people over a 3-year period in an effort to reduce recidivism, homelessness, more appropriate utilization of healthcare dollars. Next slide.
So the quick thumbnail on this is that housing authorities need to do more to serve people with criminal histories. And quite frankly, we have a lot of latitude in terms of being able to serve that population, with the exception of registered sex offenders. So if you have a housing authority that's saying that there's regulations that they can't serve people with criminal histories, I would definitely challenge that mindset. You can advance.
And this is just one of our most recent projects where we developed 10 units of tiny homes that we just finished construction on last month, located on a lot that's contiguous to our Roosevelt Crossing site, where we had strong community support for the project based on long track record that we've had in the neighborhood. Last slide. As part of our Pay for Success project, we had to do a lot of data analysis, and one of the things that we looked at was the effectiveness of our permanent supportive housing projects. And over a 3-year period, we looked at everybody that was released to Lane County on supervision, and then we teased out the sponsors population who went through our long-term housing projects. And what we found was there was a 60% reduction in recidivism. So we know that the impact of these projects is profound with this population. And with that, I'll wrap up because I know we want to leave time for Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul and Jacob. Now we'll open it up for discussion if people have questions for Susan, Paul, and Jacob on engaging their communities. Or if Darcy, if questions have come in, can't quite see it with the slides up on the screen, but yeah, Darcy, if also questions have come in.
No questions have come in to me yet, but just as a reminder, if you would like to send a question in via the chat box, you can go ahead and send that either to me directly or to the group as a whole. In addition, if you'd like to talk on the webinar, you can unmute yourself, and please just make sure your computer is muted so we don't hear any reverberations on the phone.
No, the computer.
Hi, this is Ellen Schwarzenberg from San Joaquin County. We have some funding available, but no takers. Any suggestions?
When you say no takers, you have funding available to develop housing?
That's the presumption with one of the grants that our county received. However, we're dealing with all the same issues that, you've cited, particularly the NIMBY issue. And no one wants to it seems no one wants to take the reins to initiate the process. How do we get somebody off the dime, and who would you recommend in terms of either agency-wise or program-wise?
I guess just, obviously I'm always a fan of, counties approaching housing authorities, but another thought would be our Citizen Advisory Committee was made up of not just people from the neighborhood, but key leaders in the community. And I guess I'm wondering if pulling together a coalition with a goal of developing X number of units for people returning to the community from prison could give you a broader base to put pressure on a potential, community development corporation or housing authority to become active. I think CDCs or housing authorities probably are risk adverse, and if someone else took the lead on the neighborhood engagement, that could be helpful. That's just me thinking off on the fly there.
And Jacob, just briefly, could you describe community development corporations real quick? I know I haven't described it, but not just if folks aren't familiar with CDCs.
For sure. So in Oregon, CDCs are 501c3 nonprofits, but that label, Community Development Corporation, I think kind of came out of the 90s. And it's essentially nonprofits that develop and manage affordable housing over time. That's a generalization, but that's how I would describe it.
Susan, did you have any thoughts on Ellen's question or ever run into anything similar to that in Fresno?
I think in terms of partnerships, if the target population includes individuals with a serious mental illness or individuals with any substance use disorder. Certainly working closely with the Department of Behavioral Health in the county would be hopefully helpful. And if you want to have any discussions with us in Fresno to see how we've partnered on those types of projects, we'd be happy to have follow-up conversations. And then I think also reaching through other housing-related partnerships. If you have a continuum of care, that might be an avenue to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. Thank you for extending that offer.
The other thing, just to put another plug in for Corporation for Supportive Housing, their Housing Institute really is designed to get developers and service providers interested in developing permanent supportive housing. So if that's the type of project you're looking to develop and you don't have anybody chomping at the bit to develop it, that could be something to look at downstream. And again, we'd be happy to share our contract with San Joaquin if that's of interest.
Certainly. Thank you.
We did have a question come in via chat box, and I think this is for the Oregon folks, but if not, please clarify. What is the average stay for an individual in the housing programs you described?
So in the transitional housing program at Roosevelt Crossing that Jacob described, the average length of stay is 60 to 120 days. In the PSH units at the Oaks and elsewhere, the average length of stay has been in the 18 to 24 month range.
And in Fresno, just to quickly tap into our length of stay for our master leasing program, which is the sort of bridge to folks getting a rental history, the length of stay really is very individualized. It's a newer program, so we're still learning, but we have folks who stay just a couple of months, and we've had some folks who've been there a year. In our permanent supportive housing, because our target population is individuals with a serious mental illness, we have not put caps on their length of stay. We've really emphasized the permanent part of permanent supportive housing. And so we have folks who've lived there for many, many years.
Thanks for answering those questions. I'm going to pause. Any other questions? Okay, so here's a question, Susan, specifically for you. And I think I know the answer, but I will make sure. Someone is asking who would be the best contact in Fresno County to get further information. My guess is that that would be you, Susan?
Yeah, folks can start with me, and then depending on the specific question, based on a lot of things I said, I might have a lead person who would do the follow-up contacts.
Great. And so if you would, if anybody is interested, you can just send an email to either myself or Ashley by using the generic DSH diversion at dsh.ca.gov. If you send us that email, we can kind of track who we're sending over to Susan at Fresno, and also can just connect you with any others who might be have some expertise in the area that you're looking for. And Susan just sent our panelists today and providing so much great information and a lot of concrete examples of things that counties can work on and things that people can try and experiment with in such a difficult area where creativity is really needed. A recording of this webinar will be placed on our DSH Diversion webpage. I encourage everyone to check out that webpage if you haven't yet, where we are cataloging all of the technical assistance webinars that we've provided to date related to mental health diversion. In addition, Ashley and I are holding this Friday our monthly informal office hours call, where the topic will be risk assessments and court reports. And I will have about 10 or 15 minutes prepared talking points, but also just gives a chance for any county and any representative to call in and get a hold of Ashley and I if you have questions about contracts, questions about invoicing, other technical assistance areas that that maybe we haven't spoken to yet, but your county is facing roadblocks. That informal conference call will be on Friday the 28th at 10 a.m. Again, if you ever have any questions or would like any follow-up information, please don't hesitate to email us at dshdiversion at dsh.ca.gov, and one of us will get back to you. Thanks again, everyone, for your time, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.